I told 7 women I was ready to have children. Then I told them I would never have those children with my husband. Karine asked why I had married him, and I said dating teaches you to be a girlfriend, while marriage teaches you to be a wife. A first marriage was where you made mistakes on someone safe, someone who loved you too much to leave. Another friend asked what would happen when I met the man I truly wanted. I'd graduate. They laughed when I added that my next husband should send Emmett a thank you card. A cream card appeared on the hall console beside my forgotten phone. I assumed Karine had found both. Emmett had placed them there after standing in the doorway long enough to hear every word. He pressed his thumb along the clean edge of the card, then walked away before I turned around. 7 years earlier, I had called the same idea caution instead of cruelty. My name is Mireya Keane. I was 35 and managed regional partnerships for a medical device company in St. Louis. My work was to enter a room full of hospital directors, learn what each person needed, and make our product sound like the safest answer. Of course, safety mattered to me. It always had. I just valued it differently in business than I did in love. My father left when I was 12. He packed one navy suitcase after Sunday breakfast and told my mother he had outgrown the life they had chosen. For 6 years, she kept his side of the closet empty. She said he needed room to come home. I watched her wait, and I made one private rule. No choice would ever trap me that completely. Then I met Emmett. He was a civil infrastructure manager with careful hands and no interest in impressing a room. On our third date, rain trapped us beneath the awning of a closed flower shop. My shoe strap broke. He fixed it with a paper clip, then walked 2 miles beside me because I refused to take it off. He did not turn the rescue into a story about himself. That was new to me. Sunday mornings became ours. We bought coffee, chose one neighborhood, and walked every street without checking the time. Emmett carried folded paper maps even after every phone had directions. He marked the cafes I liked and the buildings he wanted to study. At home, he wrote thank you cards to anyone who had hosted us. Cream paper, blue ink, one clean line under his thumb before he put each card in its envelope. I loved those mornings. That part was real. What I did not love was how easily he removed himself from every decision. He asked what restaurant I wanted, where I wanted to live, and when I wanted to marry. He called it trust. Sometimes it felt like being handed a blank page by a man who would later praise whatever I wrote. When he proposed, I said yes because he was kind and because I was tired of men who made love feel like a test. I also told myself that marriage would teach me things dating never could. How to share money, how to fight without leaving, how to live beside another person when romance became a grocery list. During our first argument about money, I raised my voice until he stopped speaking. Later, while he washed 2 untouched dinner plates, I decided that next time I would stay calmer. Lesson learned. During our first Christmas with his family, I hated being expected to spend 4 nights in his sister's crowded house. I decided that in my next serious relationship, I would settle holiday rules early. Another lesson. Emmett believed we were building habits together. I treated each mistake like a note for a cleaner future. The year I earned a promotion in St. Louis, he left a project team he respected and moved with me. He paid the last part of my executive certificate while I waited for my first bonus. When my mother needed help after knee surgery, he learned her medication schedule and drove across town before work. 18 months later, a former colleague offered him an infrastructure director position in Kansas City. The salary was higher. The role was the kind he had once described as his final goal. He placed a folded city map beside my coffee and asked whether I could imagine moving. I counted 3 problems before he finished. My new region was finally growing. My mother lived 20 minutes away. His offer had arrived at the worst possible time. Emmett listened. Then he pressed his thumb along the map's edge, folded it once, and told me he would decline. I read that small movement as relief. My husband liked when a decision became simple. I did not ask what it cost him to make it simple for me. 6 months later, he asked when we might start trying for a child. I told him I needed 2 more years. He asked what would be different then. I said I would be different. He accepted that answer because accepting my answers was what he did. Of course, I loved him for it. I also trusted it. Karine was the first person who heard me call our marriage useful. We had lunch near my office, and she asked whether Emmett was my forever person. I told her forever was a word people used when they were afraid to study the exit. She laughed, but her laugh ended before mine. I decided she was being sentimental. Karine had already survived one divorce. She knew better than anyone that a marriage could matter without lasting. That evening, Emmett left a cream thank you card on my desk for the manager who had approved my promotion. He had already addressed the envelope. The inside was blank, waiting for my words. I wrote that I was grateful for the opportunity. I did not mention the man who had made it possible. My promotion changed the rooms I entered. The tables became longer. The watches became quieter and more expensive. People stopped asking whether our equipment worked and started asking how it would make them look when the hospital board reviewed the purchase. I understood that language at once. Emmett did not. At least, that was what I told myself. At a hospital partnership dinner, he spent 10 minutes discussing bridge drainage with the facilities director while I watched 3 executives gather around Wesley Alden. Wesley was 42, a biotech vice president who never appeared to search for a name. He remembered everyone before they reminded him. When I joined the group, he referred to a proposal I had made 6 months earlier and told the hospital president that I had seen a risk no one else had noticed. Everyone at the table had heard him praise me. I liked that more than I liked the praise itself. On the drive home, Emmett said the dinner had gone well. I waited for him to mention Wesley's comment. He did not. He talked about a failing, retaining wall near the hospital loading area and said it might delay future deliveries. I told him that he could turn any successful evening into a maintenance report. He asked whether I had wanted him to say something different. The question was soft. Too soft. It placed the work back in my hands. I said I wanted a husband who knew without being coached. He looked at the road and pressed his thumb along the edge of the parking receipt. Then he placed it in the cup holder. His silence made me feel correct. The next week, Wesley asked me to lead a joint presentation for 2 hospital systems. He said I was more persuasive when I stopped trying to make everyone comfortable. I repeated that line to Karine over drinks. She said it sounded like the kind of permission I had been waiting to receive. I told her Emmett had made comfort his whole personality. She asked whether comfort was truly the problem or whether I had stopped respecting the person providing it. That question irritated me, so I ordered another drink and explained the difference between gratitude and attraction. By dessert, Karine was agreeing again. At home, Emmett had left the porch light on. He had also repaired the loose cabinet hinge, packed my lunch, and placed my mother's new insurance forms beside my bag. I counted all of it as chores. What I wanted was for him to look at me in a crowded room and make his pride obvious without being asked. Our next serious fight began with a house. Emmett found a brick bungalow near Forest Park. It had a narrow garden, a small office for me, and a bedroom facing an old maple tree. He arranged a viewing on a Saturday morning. The seller had left fresh bread on the counter, and the whole place smelled warm enough to make a future seem easy. In the empty second bedroom, Emmett asked whether I could picture a crib there. I pictured one, just not with him beside it. The thought arrived without drama. That was why it frightened me for almost 5 seconds. Then I counted. 1 mortgage. 1 child. 30 years of decisions tied to a man I had chosen when I was still learning what I deserved. I told him the market was unstable and my job might require travel. Both things were true. Neither was the reason. In the car, he named the pattern. First, I had needed the promotion. Then I had needed the certificate. Then my mother had needed me nearby. Now the market needed to improve. He asked why every permanent plan with him required a future version of me. I heard an accusation against my ambition. That was easier to answer. I told him women were always expected to treat motherhood as the final proof of love. I said he had the luxury of wanting a child without risking his body or his career. Emmett said he was not asking for proof. He was asking whether the life he wanted was still one I wanted too. I said pressure was not partnership and ended the conversation. He pressed his thumb along the edge of the house brochure. One slow pass. Then he folded it and put it in the door pocket. That night, I wrote a private note on my phone. Next marriage, discuss children before the wedding. I added a second line about choosing a man with his own direction. The note made me feel organized. Of course, it was easier to organize the next marriage than answer a question about this one. Wesley and I began meeting twice a month for the hospital presentation. He was never improper. That made the fantasy cleaner. He wore dark suits, made fast decisions, and left meetings before anyone could waste his time. When he disagreed, people adjusted. I imagined what it would be like to stand beside a man whose ambition did not need to be translated. At one meeting, I mentioned that my husband worked in public infrastructure. Wesley asked which projects Emmett managed. When I named two, Wesley looked surprised and said one of them had saved a distribution corridor his company used during a flood season. I reduced Emmett's work with a smile. I said he was good with roads, schedules, and other things people only noticed when they failed. Wesley said that sounded like important work. I changed the subject. A few days later, I found Emmett speaking to Victor Salas, his former colleague in Kansas City. Emmett stood in the study with the old folded map open across his desk. Victor's voice came through the speaker and mentioned a revised transit corridor. When Emmett saw me, he ended the call. I asked whether Kansas City still needed free advice. He said Victor sometimes called because he trusted Emmett's judgment. Then he pressed the edge of the map flat beneath his thumb. The detail did not fit the man I had been describing to myself. People did not keep calling men without ambition. I solved the problem by deciding Victor was taking advantage of him too. At our 6th anniversary dinner, Emmett gave me a slim watch for client meetings. I gave him a weekend bag still inside the store paper. He asked where I imagined us on our 10th anniversary. I said somewhere warmer. He wanted to know whether that meant a place or a life. I told him not to turn dinner into a planning session. We had survived 6 years. That should have been enough reassurance. Across the restaurant, a couple lifted their baby from a high chair. Emmett watched the father wipe food from the child's sleeve. His face changed in a small, unguarded way. The sadness was simple. It asked nothing from me. I treated it like pressure anyway. On Monday, Corrine sent invitations for a girls' night at her townhouse. Wine, dinner, no husbands. She said we all needed one room where nobody expected a polished answer. I agreed before checking my calendar. The hospital presentation with Wesley would be finished by then. My promotion review was close. For once, I wanted to say exactly what I thought about my marriage and hear women admit that I was not cruel for wanting more. Emmett asked why I smiled at the invitation. I told him Corrine was giving me one evening without a list. He said he hoped I could come home feeling lighter. Of course, he meant it kindly. I heard permission. Corrine's townhouse smelled of orange peel and the cedar candles she bought whenever she wanted her home to look calm. 7 of us sat around her low dining table. Valerie had been married for 14 years. June was engaged. The others carried different versions of the same worry. Children, money, time, whether love should feel harder than it did. My phone was not in my bag. I had left it charging beside the bed. Corrine offered hers if I needed to call Emmett, but I said my husband knew where I was. That sentence made everyone smile. It sounded like trust. The first bottle emptied before dinner. Corrine asked June whether she wanted children. June said yes, after the wedding and after 1 year alone with her husband. Valerie turned to me and said I would be a good mother whenever I decided I was ready. I did not plan the answer. I had simply grown tired of polite lies. I said I was ready already. Then I said I would never have children with Emmett. 2 women laughed because they thought the sentence had another ending. It did not. Valerie put down her glass. June asked whether Emmett knew. I told her there was nothing for him to know yet. Wanting children and choosing their father were separate decisions. Corrine asked why I had stayed married if I saw him that way. There it was. The question I had wanted someone to ask. I explained that dating teaches a woman to be a girlfriend, but only marriage teaches her how to be a wife. You can read about compromise, I said, but you cannot learn it until another person is in your bathroom, your bank account, and every holiday plan. I wanted to make those early mistakes with someone safe. June repeated the word safe as if it had changed meaning. I said safe meant a man who forgave, a man who did not play games, a man who loved me too much to leave because I was still becoming myself. Valerie asked whether Emmett had agreed to be temporary. I told her no one enters a marriage with an end date, but adults understand that not every relationship is meant to last forever. That sounded reasonable. I had used reasonable language in hospital contracts for years. If a sentence stayed calm enough, people often stopped examining what it allowed. Kareen's eyes moved toward the dark hall behind me. I thought she had heard the front door settle. She asked what would happen if I met the man I truly wanted. My answer came in 2 words. I graduate. This time only Kareen laughed. It was one short sound, more surprise than approval. I kept going because silence had begun gathering around me. I said my next husband would receive the improved version. I would know how to discuss money, choose holidays, manage conflict, and set expectations before resentment began. Honestly, I added, that man should send Emmett a thank you card. Valerie asked whether I could hear myself. I said everyone uses relationships to learn. I was only honest enough to admit it. At that moment, Kareen stood and walked past me. On the hall console sat my phone and a cream card with thank you printed across the front. The card was the one Emmett had left near our keys for both of us to sign. I had forgotten it with my phone. I assumed Kareen had found them near the door. She did not explain. She picked up my phone, carried it to the table, and placed it beside my glass. The card stayed on the console. Its clean edge held a shallow line, as if a thumb had pressed there. That was the detail that opened the door for a second. Emmett knew Kareen's alarm code. He also knew I had forgotten my phone because he had watched me charge it. The front door had made a sound. Kareen had looked into the hall. I could have stood. I could have checked the street. Instead, I decided Kareen had brought the phone from the bedroom where guests left their coats. The card was probably stuck to it. The explanation was ordinary, so I chose it. Dinner continued, but the room no longer belonged to me. June asked about Kareen's renovation. Valerie moved to the sofa and did not return to the table. One woman left before dessert because her son had a fever. No one asked another question about my marriage. I called their discomfort hypocrisy. Privately, I was pleased. People only became uncomfortable when someone said the thing they had trained themselves not to say. Before I left, Kareen handed me the cream card. She asked whether I wanted to take it home. I said Emmett could write another one. She held the card for 1 extra second. Then she let go. When I reached our apartment, the lights were off except for the lamp in the study. The old Kansas City map was no longer on Emmett's desk. I saw the empty square where it had been and assumed he had finally thrown it away. The card went into my bag. My phone went on the charger. I fell asleep beside a man who kept his back toward me and believed I had returned to the same marriage I had left that afternoon. At breakfast, Emmett made coffee for 1 person. That was the first change. Small enough to dismiss. He had an early meeting, and I had told him many times that I could manage my own morning. Of course, when he finally stopped placing my cup beside the fruit bowl, I called it maturity instead of distance. He asked whether I had enjoyed the evening. I said the women had talked too much and solved nothing. He wanted to know whether we had talked about marriage. The spoon stopped halfway to my mouth. I counted 1 breath, then 2. I told him June was planning her wedding and Valerie was complaining about school fees. Neither answer was false. I simply removed myself from the story. Emmett asked whether I had said anything about us. I told him he was being strange. He looked down at the receipt from the coffee beans he had bought the day before. His thumb moved along its edge. 1 pass. Then another. He folded it and put it in his pocket. He said he understood. There was no accusation to defeat, so I decided the moment was over. For the next 10 days, our apartment ran perfectly. Bills were paid. Groceries appeared. My mother's pharmacy order arrived on time. Yet the work had lost his voice. Emmett stopped sending me small messages about whether I needed anything. He no longer asked what time I would be home. On Sunday morning, he walked alone. I slept until 9 and told myself I had wanted the rest. The hospital presentation with Wesley was a success. 2 systems approved a trial, and my regional director said the result would matter during my promotion review. Wesley shook my hand in the lobby and told me I had controlled a difficult room without forcing it. That was the kind of praise Emmett never knew how to give. I asked Wesley whether he had ever delayed a major life decision because the person beside him was comfortable with less. He studied me before answering. He said comfort could be love, fear, or simple habit, and that nobody outside a marriage could identify which one it was. I wanted a sharper answer. I heard caution and decided it was discretion. Men in his position did not make careless personal moves around business partners. That restraint made him seem even more valuable. Corrine did not congratulate me when I sent the presentation result to our group chat. Valerie replied with a single thumbs up. June said she was busy with wedding appointments. 3 women who normally turned every small success into a dinner had nothing to suggest. I called Corrine that evening. She answered after the 4th ring and said she only had a minute. I asked why everyone had become so serious after one honest conversation. Corrine said honesty was not the word bothering them. She said Emmett believed he was in a marriage, while I had described him as equipment I planned to leave behind after training. I told her she had laughed. She said she had laughed once because she was shocked and did not know what else to do. Then she admitted that she had encouraged me to treat every desire as a door. She did not want to help me push this one open. Her sudden conscience sounded convenient. I reminded her how many times she had told me not to settle. Corrine said not settling and using a person were different choices. I ended the call before she could turn her divorce into a moral degree. That night, I tried a softer plan with Emmett. I opened our shared calendar and placed a date 12 months ahead. On that date, I wrote house and baby decision. I showed him the screen and said I understood that he needed progress. He asked what would change in 12 months. I said my promotion would be settled and my mother would be stronger. He asked what would change inside me. The question was unfair because it demanded an answer I had spent 7 years avoiding. I told him compromise only worked if he accepted something instead of examining every word for weakness. He looked at the date. Then he deleted it. He deleted it without speaking, but his jaw tightened once. He said a calendar note was not a future if one person had written it to stop the other from speaking. For 1 second, he looked like the man beneath the flower shop awning, holding my broken shoe and waiting for me to trust him. His eyes were tired, not cold, not strategic, just hurt. I nearly asked what he needed from me that night. Then I remembered how often his needs arrived disguised as practical questions. A house viewing, a date on a calendar, a room for a crib. He had never once stood in front of me and said he would leave if I refused. If the risk was real, I believed a strong man would name it. I closed the calendar. Emmett said he no longer wanted a date chosen to keep him quiet. I heard another task being handed to me, so I told him to decide what he wanted for once. He nodded. His thumb rested against the hard edge of his closed laptop. 2 days later, his sister Sabine came to the apartment with a tape measure and a cardboard tube. Sabine worked in commercial property and treated every room like a problem that could be priced. She and I had never been close. She disliked explanations that arrived after damage. I found her in the study measuring the width of Emmett's bookcase. The old Kansas City map lay open on the floor. 2 neighborhoods had been circled in blue, and a small note beside one circle read 12 minutes. I asked whether they were redesigning the room without me. Sabine rolled the map before answering. She said Emmett had asked for her opinion about space. I assumed he wanted a larger desk or another storage unit. Engineers could turn 6 books into a building project. The circles were probably transit sites Victor had mentioned. Sabine asked whether Emmett and I were all right. I told her every marriage looked unstable to people who only visited during an argument. She held my eyes for a moment, then carried the tube into the hall. She did not defend her brother. That made me think I had won. The next Sunday, My mother asked why Emmett had stopped checking the loose rail on her back steps. When I said a marriage could not survive on errands, she said it could not survive on contempt either. I stood so quickly that my chair struck the wall. My mother did not apologize. She returned to peeling an orange, one long strip at a time. At home, Emmett sat on the floor beside an open cabinet. He had removed the box containing our old travel maps. Half were gone. I asked why the cabinet was open. He said he was sorting what he still used. For a second, the missing maps made his answer sound larger than storage. I decided it was not. Instead, I told him my promotion review was in 3 weeks. I needed calm until then. After the decision, we could discuss what each of us wanted. Emmett asked whether he had ever been part of a plan that did not begin after my next achievement. I said his problem was that he had no next achievement of his own. His hand stopped on a folded map. The sadness returned, but only for a moment. Then his thumb pressed the paper's edge flat. He told me he would not disturb my review. I took that as surrender. It gave me 3 weeks to finish the last lesson of my marriage and choose the exact day I would leave it. My promotion came with a reception at the medical company's regional office. Glass walls faced the river. A string quartet played near the elevators, soft enough for executives to speak over it. I wore the watch Emmett had given me and arrived without him. My director, Hannah, asked whether my husband would join us later. I said we were giving each other space. That was the first time I presented us as separated. The word felt clean. It turned years of uncertainty into a decision other people could respect. Before Wesley arrived, I removed my wedding ring and placed it in the small pocket of my bag. Hannah saw me do it. She looked away with the careful manners of someone who planned to remember. Wesley congratulated me near the windows. He had recommended my presentation work to the review committee, and I wanted the evening to feel like the beginning of the life I had prepared for. I told him the promotion was not my only change. My marriage was ending. He asked whether Emmett knew. I said he understood that we had grown in different directions. Wesley asked again, this time more plainly, whether I had told my husband the marriage was ending. I said the final conversation would happen soon. Years of a life could not be reduced to one announcement. His attention cooled. He congratulated me once more, then joined a group from the hospital system. I interpreted the distance as respect for timing. A serious man would wait until I was free. Hannah returned while I was putting my ring back on. She said she hoped I had people supporting me. I told her I was the one who usually supported everyone else. She gave me a look I could not place. Then she asked whether Emmett had not moved to St. Louis for my first promotion. I said moving once did not make him responsible for my career. That answer ended the conversation. It also followed me home. Emmett was waiting at the dining table. The cream thank you card from Kareen's house lay beside him. I had forgotten it in my bag until that morning, when it fell out near our keys. He had found it blank. He asked where my ring had been during the reception. I could have blamed a tight finger. Instead, I chose honesty in the form that served me. I said I had told people we were taking space. I said the description matched the marriage we already had. Emmett wanted to know whether I had left him before informing him. I told him he always demanded dramatic language after years of avoiding dramatic action. That was the one thing I said that was completely true. He had made himself easy. He had hidden every strong preference beneath patience, then expected me to discover the man he refused to show. He did not argue. He said he had spent years making himself safe because he believed conflict would make me leave. Each time he surrendered something, I stayed. He had mistaken my presence for a choice. For once, he named his own failure without asking me to repair it. The clarity came too late to attract me. It only made him look teachable. Emmett gave me one final offer. He asked me to answer a single question without mentioning my job, my mother, money, timing, or the future. Did I choose him now, as he was? I looked at the blank card between us. 7 years of marriage, and he wanted a yes or no as if love were a hospital purchase waiting for approval. I said I had already received everything this marriage could teach me. His thumb moved along the card's clean edge. He did not fold it. He only pushed it toward me. Then he said he would handle the rest properly. I asked whether that was meant to frighten me. He said no. The answer was so calm that I became louder. I told him the apartment was in both names. Our savings were shared, and he could not simply punish me for being honest. I said I would decide when to tell our families because I was the one with a public position to protect. Emmett listened until I finished. Then he placed his apartment key beside the card and went into the study. I called Corrine from the bedroom. The call went to voicemail. I sent a message asking her to remind me why leaving was brave. She read it the next morning and did not answer. The following day, Wesley declined my dinner invitation and said our contact should remain connected to the hospital account. I heard a temporary rule, not a rejection. Emmett packed one small case on Wednesday. He said he had a site visit and would return Friday afternoon. I asked where. He answered Kansas City. Victor's calls, the folded map, and Sabine's tape measure passed through my mind in one row. I still arranged them into the explanation that protected me. Emmett was using work to recover his pride. He would spend 2 days being needed, then return ready to accept the ending I gave him. On Thursday, I drafted a calm speech about gratitude and different paths. I chose which furniture he could take. I saved 3 apartments closer to my new office and checked whether Wesley would attend a conference in October. By Friday, my plan was finished. I would let Emmett keep the maps, the old coffee machine, and the weekend bag I had given him. I would keep the life those objects had supported. He had always allowed me to choose the direction. I expected our ending to be no different. On Friday evening, the apartment door opened too easily because Emmett's key was no longer on his ring. The study shelves were half empty. His winter coats were gone. So were the coffee machine, the box of maps, and the framed photograph from the flower shop awning. Nothing had been smashed or thrown across a room. The spaces were clean. Emmett stood beside the dining table in the shirt he wore for important meetings. Sabine waited near the window. Between them lay the Kansas City map, a job acceptance letter, a lease for a furnished apartment, and the cream thank you card. I set my bag on a chair. My hand stayed around the strap. Emmett smiled once. It was not warm, but it was not cruel. Then his thumb pressed along the card's edge. He said I had graduated. My fingers pulled harder on the bag strap until the seam pressed into my palm. He told me he had come to Corrine's house with my phone and the card. He had heard me say I wanted children, just not his. He had heard that I chose him because he was safe. He had stood behind me when I said my next husband should thank him. I said I had been drinking. Emmett pointed to the map. He said alcohol had not refused the house near Forest Park. Alcohol had not moved every conversation about children 2 years forward. Alcohol had not written private rules for a next marriage while he was still living inside this one. The old map had come from the director offer he declined for me. Victor's call had reopened that offer. The blue circles marked apartments. The 12-minute note was the distance from his new home to his new office. Sabine had measured the bookcase because it was the only large thing he planned to take. Every fact had already been in front of me. I had given each one a smaller meaning. I asked whether he had planned all of this to punish me. He said no. He had planned it because I had built our marriage around the certainty that he would never leave. The only honest answer left was to leave without asking me to approve the route. Then he said I had not been training to become a wife. I had been training him to stop being my husband. Sabine picked up the cardboard tube. I told her this was private. She said it had been private at Corrine's house too, until I made her brother's life a group discussion. The sentence landed because she did not raise her voice. There was nothing in it I could rename. I reached for my phone to call Corrine. Her name sat above my unanswered message. I put the phone back into my bag. Emmett said the dissolution petition would be filed Monday and the property exchange would be arranged by email. He moved to the furnished Kansas City apartment while I stayed in St. Louis for 6 weeks before taking a smaller place near my office. The money he had quietly used for my mother's bills, groceries, and the last part of my certificate stopped appearing in the right places. Corrine left our group chat. Valerie stopped inviting me to dinner, and June seated me with co-workers instead of friends at her wedding. Wesley listened once when I explained the divorce, then said marrying a person I never meant to choose was not complicated, and kept every later conversation about work. I kept my promotion, but Hannah assigned the next hospital presentation to 2 managers because she no longer trusted me to separate a polished story from a complete one. 13 months later, I saw Emmett at Victor's housewarming in Kansas City. I had been invited because our companies shared a regional project. Emmett stood beside Lenora, a public school counselor with plain earrings and an easy laugh. She listened when he described a bridge repair. She asked questions. She did not look around for someone more important. Someone near the drinks asked whether he would ever marry again. Emmett looked at Lenora before answering. He said marriage stopped feeling dangerous when both people knew they were being chosen. He did not look at me. I had believed keeping one foot near the door made me impossible to trap. It only meant I never placed both feet inside the life that was carrying me. Emmett had not been practice. He had been the full marriage, and I had treated every year with him as notes for a man who never arrived. The cream thank you card still sits in my desk, blank inside and soft at the fold. It is addressed to the husband I expected to meet, from the wife who trained the right one to leave.